Welcome to Make Sylacauga Healthy Again. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Douglas. Tara and I have been very lucky in our chiropractic careers to have always been in a private practice. Some people end up in kind of a corporate kind of situation, but we can control a lot of what happens in our office. And one of the beautiful things is that you form relationships with people. You get to meet people of all different professions, all different faiths, just very interesting group. And we get to talk to them in 10 to 15-minute snips all day long. And so you learn a lot about them, and as you get to know people over the years, you learn a lot more. So we get to the point where we don't talk about where they hurt anymore. We kind of talk about their family and what's going on in their life. But some conversations stick out more than others. And I remember one time I talked to a preacher about what makes the best sermon, in his opinion. And he said, in his opinion, the best sermon is one that really speaks to him and the congregation. So there are things that a preacher will talk about that he needs to hear as much as the congregation needs to hear it. So today I'm going to do one of those. I read a quote a few weeks ago and I've thought about it since. But it said, "Muddy water never settles if it's continuously stirred." And I thought, who needs to hear that? I think everybody needs to hear it, but I think especially sometimes Jonathan needs to hear that. Let's talk about it. So that quote that muddy water never settles if it's constantly stirred, of course, applies to not just small towns, but big cities. I mean, we've lived in big cities and small towns. It's all kind of the same. But the scenario is that, let's say someone posts something online and you think, boy, I'm going to stir that up and I'm going to post something nasty about it. Then it gets more stirred up and then somebody else sees it and then they stir it up and then somebody else stirs it up. Never going to settle. It can't settle. So you got other options. So one of the other options could be maybe we let it settle. So we have a graphic of that. What does it look like? You just let that thing go. You see that somebody posts something, you certainly could make a comment about it. Why don't we just let that thing settle to the bottom? And then we've got some clear water we can start to deal with, and then a community starts healing at that point. Another option is that you can find some way, maybe through therapy or through your church or through talking to some good friends that can help counsel you, but maybe you can find a way to kind of filter that. And if you filter it, then you can fix the animosity in a more permanent way. Maybe you can actually find some discipline to just clear it out of yourself and create that clear water. And so I came up with an example that I think is a very realistic example because I've seen this happen recently. But let's say that a community organization posts that they had some volunteers that they promoted to some kind of leadership position and they're real proud of them for volunteering. And then a person's reading that and they have two options. They can either post, you know what, it seems like the same people always get the same positions and nobody else ever gets a chance. And then somebody else piles on that. And they say, oh my gosh, you're right. That's exactly what happens. And it just keeps going on. And everybody starts piling on. Oh, I can't believe they promoted these people, all those kind of things. Well, here's what really happened. Somebody was looking at that post and they were thinking, you know, I might like to volunteer and help with this organization. And then they see all these negative comments that weren't necessary. And they say, you know what, I'm not going to be involved with this. And then some corporate sponsors, some businesses thought, you know what, I might put some money behind this and help out with the city. They're reading it and think, boy, I don't need that kind of bad publicity. I'm staying way away from this. And then the whole thing shrinks. And we certainly see that in not just small towns, but everywhere. Or how about this? The person says, you know what, I could say something nasty about that, but instead I might send that volunteer a message and say, you know what, congratulations, I'm glad to see that you got promoted and appreciate you helping in the town. And then that person says, well, you know, why don't you come out? And then you go out and you help with this organization and you maybe bring a friend. And then corporate sponsors see that and they think, oh my gosh, this is growing and there were no negative comments and now we can put some money toward it. and now we've got flowers on Broadway, or whatever it is that could happen that comes from that. But you certainly are not going to end up with that result if you keep stirring that water. We've got to let it settle. We've got one final graphic to show you here. We got that stirred water. There's a lot of energy it takes to keep stirring that thing. Maybe we find a way to talk it out, we filter it, maybe we let it settle, but nobody's ever going to get to that glass at the end, that completely clear, there's never a problem. That's never going to happen. So let's eliminate that as a choice. That's not where we're going to end up. The only thing we can choose is that one on the left. Can we not stir that thing up? We've got the opportunity every single day. You have the opportunity to stir something up. You see it on Facebook and you think, boy, I'm getting into that fight. You might not have all the details. You might have all the details, but you just don't need to say anything. So maybe today, as you think about this, you could have several opportunities to stir something up, and you could stir it up, and it might even be fun to gossip and stir this thing up like crazy. But think about what the consequences of that will be. Could that go down the line and create something bad for someone? And if so, then maybe you think about it. And again, this is something that Jonathan needs to think about as much as anybody else. I've certainly stirred things up in the past, and I am certainly working this year to let every bit of muddy water settle that I possibly can. Think about that today. We'll see you next time.